Morning, boys and girls. I'm back here with E.B. White's Charlotte's Web. We're going to read Chapter 2 today. Chapter 2 is entitled Wilbur, and there's just one little picture right there that you may or may not be able to see because it's kind of far away, but it's Fern outside in the yard with Wilbur, so we can predict when she got home from school she might have had some time to spend with her pig. Fern loved Wilbur more than anything. She loved to stroke him, feed him, put him to bed. Every morning, as soon as she got up, she warmed his milk, tied his bib on, and held his bottle for him. Every afternoon, when the school bus stopped in front of her house, she jumped out and ran to the kitchen to fix another bottle for Wilbur. She fed him again at supper time and then again before going to bed. Mrs. Arable gave him a feeding around noontime each day when Fern was at school. Wilbur loved his milk. He was never happier than when Fern was warming up a bottle for him. He would stand and gaze up at her with adoring eyes. And if you don't know what adoring means, it means loving. For the first few days of his life, Wilbur was allowed to live in a box near the stove in the kitchen. When Mrs. Arable complained, he was then moved to a bigger box out in the woodshed. At 2 weeks of age, he was moved outdoors. It was apple blossom time. The days were getting warmer. Mrs. Arable fixed a small yard, Mr. Arable, fixed a small yard especially for Wilbur, right under the apple tree, and gave him a large wooden box full of straw with a doorway cut into it so he could walk in and out as he pleased. "Won't he be cold at night?" asked Fern. "No," said her father. "You watch and see what he does." Carrying a bottle of milk, Fern sat down under the apple tree inside the yard. Wilbur ran to her and she held the bottle for him while he sucked. When he had finished the last drop, he grunted and walked sleepily into his box. Fern peered through the door. Wilbur was poking through the straw with his snout. His snout is his nose, by the way, for those of you who may not know what a snout is. He crawled into the tunnel and he disappeared from sight. He crawled into the tunnel of straw and disappeared from sight. He was completely covered. Fern was enchanted. Enchanted means kind of like she's liking the situation a whole lot. It was really capturing her attention. It relieved her mind to know that her baby would sleep covered up and warm. So that's what was in the picture we saw. Every morning after breakfast, Wilbur walked out to the road with Fern and waited with her till the bus came. She would wave goodbye to him, and he would stand and watch the bus until it vanished around the turn. While Fern was in school, Wilbur was shut up inside his yard. But as soon as she got home in the afternoon, she would take him out and he would follow her all over the place. If she went to the house, Wilbur went too. If she went upstairs, Wilbur would wait at the bottom step until she came back. If she took her doll for a walk in the doll carriage, Wilbur followed along. Sometimes on these journeys, Wilbur would get tired and Fern would pick him up and put him in the carriage right alongside the doll. And there's a picture of him, Wilbur in the doll carriage. That's pretty cute, huh? He liked this, and if he was very tired, he would close his eyes and he would go to sleep right under the doll's blanket. He looked cute when his eyes were closed because his lashes were so long. The doll would close her eyes too, and Fern would wheel the carriage very slowly and smoothly, not to wake up her little babies. One afternoon, Fern and Avery put on bathing suits and went down to the brook for a swim. Wilbur tagged along at Fern's heels. When she waded into the brook, Wilbur waded with her. He found the water quite cold, too cold for his liking. So while the children swam and played and splashed the water at each other, Wilbur amused himself in the mud along the edge of the brook, where it was warm and moist and delightful and sticky and oozy, just like pigs like, huh? Every day was a happy day and every night was peaceful. Wilbur was what farmers call a spring pig, which means he was simply born in the springtime. When he was 5 weeks old, Mr. Arable said he was big enough now to sell and he'd have to be sold. Fern broke down and cried. But her father was firm about it. Wilbur's appetite had increased and he was beginning to eat scraps of food in addition to milk. Mr. Arable was not willing to provide for him any longer. He had already sold Wilbur's 10 brothers and sisters. He's got to go, Fern. You have had your fun raising the baby pig, but Wilbur is not a baby any longer. He has to be sold. Call up the Zuckermans, suggested Mrs. Arable to Fern. Your Uncle Homer sometimes raises a pig, and if Wilbur goes there to live, you can walk down the road and visit him as often as you like. How much money should I ask for him? Fern wanted to know. Well, said her father, he's a runt. Tell your Uncle Homer you've got a pig you'll sell him for $6 and see what he says. It was soon arranged. Fern phoned and got her Aunt Edith and her Aunt Edith hollered for Uncle Homer, and Uncle Homer came in from the barn and he talked to Fern. When he heard the price was only $6, he said he'd buy that pig. The next day Wilbur was taken from his home under the apple tree and went to live in a manure pile, which is a poop pile, for those of you who don't know the word manure, in the cellar of the Zuckerman's barn. And that's the end of chapter 2.